Ernie, how did the work on spirituality lead into the work you've done on shame?
In some ways it's simple, in some ways it's complex. The constant thing that I was asking, my fascination with AA has never ceased, and I keep asking this question, how does it work? And of course, Bill Wilson, AA's co-founder, when asked that question, answered very well, thank you. But I'm clearly the spirituality, at least to me, the spirituality of it is what is at the heart of recovery. And to look at that more, what is the message of this spirituality? And I think one of the things that got me off, back in 1990 or 77, when I was still working on the dissertation, the oil shock hit. When oil prices suddenly went up, I remember TV news when oil went over $1 a gallon, and I mean, it was that, and sort of everybody was wringing their hands. There were alternate days at the gas stations, and everybody, what are we going to do? Except at AA meetings. These people had no sense of panic, no sense of trouble. And I was listening, trying to what is going on here, and the sense, the letting go, and in a sort of be able to be disengaged from a culture that in some ways is addicted to so many things, and keep on. The fundamental thing in this spirituality is this recognition of this hole in the middle of our being, and what do you do with it, instead of trying to fill this hole with all these other substances or activities or something, recognizing its reality and realizing that in spirituality is the only calming of that. The sense that there's something wrong with us, which is contrary to every message the culture is sending on one level, all this self-esteem stuff and positive thinking and all of this emphasis on how good you are and the importance of all of these things, while at the same time the culture is giving you all these messages, there's something wrong with you, because that's how they sell something to you. I can go all the way back to remember when I was in grammar school, the Sunday Funnies, would have these things in the bottom of some pages, even your best friend won't tell you. It was an ad for some toothpaste or mouthwash. And all these, they're more subtle now, but advertisers basically tell you there's something wrong with you. And if you buy our product, that will, and of course, and this makes the economy run, we can't knock it. But it struck me that the part of the spirituality was being able to transcend that, being able to live with this sense of there's something wrong with me. Okay, now what? Instead of wring your hands over. And I, at the same time, almost accidentally, I was reading the literature on shame. I think the first Helen Lynn's book on Shame and the Search for Identity, which is basically a study of literature, which is one reason I got into the book. I was looking for literary themes, sort of brought me to this distinction. The work of Gerhard Piers and Peter Singer, with this distinction between shame and guilt, which clarify this for me, and realizing that this had been lost. This had been lost. And so I'm looking at how do people deal with this realization of there's something wrong with me, and I go on with life because that's what it means to be human. And this experience of there's something wrong with me, that's the experience of shame in this classic understanding. Shame is not the same as embarrassment. The trouble is with shame is we've lost the meaning of shame. And I don't think that book I published back in 1981 made much of a difference, because the people who picked it up sort of distorted it very quickly because of the self-esteem emphasis. But shame is not the same as embarrassment, sort of being caught with your pants down or whatever. Shame is the realization that there is something wrong with me. It's as simple as that. Maybe the distinction from guilt will clarify it. If I can, there's a schema that I did that I'm borrowing actually from Lewis and others who've gone before and put this together. Guilt results from a violation, a transgression, the fault of doing, the exercise of power or control. There's guilt. Whereas shame results from a failure, a falling short, a fault of being, the failure of power or control. See, there are two ways in which human beings feel bad. Feeling bad for what we do, or feeling bad for what we are. And guilt is feeling bad for what we do. Take the image of a football field, which is a classic one that I use. It's enclosed by two kinds of lines, side lines and end lines, okay? And the rules of the game are you play it within these boundaries. And if you're going down the field and you go across the sideline and whistle blows and play is stopped because you've gone out of bounds. Now, I know enough about football to know that it's unintentionally at times, and okay. But they're restraining boundaries. You're not supposed to cross them. Whereas the end lines are goal lines. You feel bad in relation to the end line, the goal line, not if you cross it, but if you fail to cross it. So shame is a falling short. Guilt then is concerned with a separate, discrete act. Some law or rule is broken. One is guilty for something. Whereas shame concerns the overall self, some ideal, some principle. One is ashamed of oneself. And guilt results in a feeling of wrongdoing, the sense of wickedness, the condemnation, I am not good, and of course the fear of punishment. Whereas shame results in a feeling of inadequacy, a sense not of wickedness but of worthlessness. The self-accusations and shame, I am no good, or I am not good enough. Anything that has to do with enoughness, of course, we're back to addiction. And the fear in shame is not the fear of punishment, but the fear of abandonment. What does it feel like? Guilt is a pain, shame is an ache. And if you're old enough to have various kinds of pains, which perhaps you aren't yet, Bill, but there's a difference between a pain and an ache. Guilt is repaired by opposite acts, by making amends. Guilt can be quantified. This I see really the amends steps, the inventory and amends steps in Alcoholics Anonymous take care of guilt, whereas shame is qualitative rather than quantitative, so it requires a new way of seeing, a kind of insight, and a very change in one's very being, a kind of conversion. In guilt, one is spoken of as reformed, whereas in shame, one is transformed. You don't reform the alcoholic. This is one problem with those. Right. The alcoholic reformation does not work. The alcoholic needs to be transformed. Surmounting guilt then can lead to feelings of righteousness, whereas transcending shame opens to a sense of identity and freedom as human. And a sense of identity rather than righteousness or self-righteousness. Is psychoanalytic vocabulary. Guilt has to do with the superego, shame with the ego ideal, the pull force. Guilt has to do more with push, and shame has to do more with looking at the pull. And this experience to distinguish the two in our experience, to be able to distinguish the two ways of feeling bad. Do I feel bad because I've done something wrong? In which case I should try to undo it, I should make amends, whatever.
That's who I am.
Because what I've done I can undo. Whereas if I feel bad because of who I am, if I'm made to feel bad because and there's something wrong with all of us. I mean, this is where, as you know, I have my concern about the destigmatization of alcoholism, because I'm sort of convinced that the day it's no longer as stigmatized to be an alcoholic, AA dies. Let me come to this when I present this workshop early on, sometimes in the South. One of the ministers would come up to me and say, Dr. Kurtz, how can we get that spirituality in our church? And I'd say, Rev, when the members of your congregation try to sneak in the back door on Sunday with nobody seeing them, you got it. This is it. Nobody is proud when they go to their first A meeting. Nobody goes to an A meeting where they're going to I love it in Boston. Boston has all these little enclaves, suburbs around it, and nobody ever goes to AA the first time in the place where people might know them. So if you live in Cambridge, you go to Watertown. If you live in Woburn, you go to Charlestown. If you live in Charlestown, you go to... And so the meetings usually begin 8 o'clock in the Boston area. And, from 7:30 to 8, all these cars are crisscrossing the area where people are going to the meetings where they feel at home. Now they don't care anymore. Nobody will recognize them. In fact, because most of the people in the neighborhood are trying to escape to the same place they do. But it's an utter riot. People, when they first go to AA, don't want to be recognized, so they go to a meeting where don't want to recognize. And this is the on the one hand, I think this is one of the Bill Wilson referred to anonymity as a spiritual 10 strike, and this recognition that there is something wrong with being an alcoholic. One cannot drink alcohol in a way this culture defines as normal. Alcohol is the social lubricant, the acceptable chemical within the society that eases things. You know, when I was at Harvard, I would run sherries in the afternoon, and it was very interesting because senior faculty often wouldn't come until I sort of made sure that there were also alternatives to sherries available. But people would come and everything would be so stiff, and then after one or two sherries, everybody would be conversing with one another, and it was just marvelous. Alcohol is a social, it's marvelous for those who can handle it. Alcoholics have to do without it. This idea that alcoholics are immature is ridiculous because not able to use a socially acceptable chemical, if anything, alcoholics have to be more mature than the ordinary person. They don't have that ability to take, you know, the chemical that within our civilization eases this kind of pressure. So this acceptance that there's something wrong with me, which the alcoholic is constantly the reminder of because I cannot drink alcohol, is a great boon. It's a great favor. It's a great benefit because it touches one's humanity because of it. I'm basically limited.
And yet somehow in the acceptance of that, you've talked about how that opens them up to connection, to recognize the imperfection of others and enter into relationship with them out of some kind of wholeness at that point.
Exactly. It's the way in which we're made. When we recognize our own imperfection, we become accepting of others' imperfection, which otherwise really grinds on us. Because, I mean, there's no one more imperfect than your spouse. I mean, we all know this. And if you want to know how imperfect you are, ask your spouse. And this is one purpose of marriage. There was an AA speaker I heard once. He was a physician. And, you know, he said, my disease is terminal self-centeredness, and marriage is the God-given antidote. And a lot of profundity in that. You know, he had a very, you know, happy and interesting marriage.
Yeah.
But we become able to live with each other's imperfections, and we recognize our own. I mean, they're still great against us. I mean, we don't suddenly lose our humanity and become saints or something. I mean, this is the other definition of a martyr, someone who lives with a saint. We struggle with this all the time. And this is, again, what people suggest at AA meetings, you know, you can practice even if you're not a member of AA, you know, beginning the day by thinking, you know, asking for help during that day to be of service to others and not to grate on others and asking that others don't grate on you. It's a nice way, but it's just to remind yourself of where you are and your own limits. And because something's going to go wrong within the first 2 hours. And what are you going to do about it? And again, I love what I hear at AA meetings, someone talking about, you know, I used to always get so frustrated, I'd drive in and every light would be red, and now a red light's a chance to pause and have a moment's meditation with my higher power. I mean, and this person is very serene.
Ernie, does that contribute to the incredible spread of 12-step, you know, programs? Is it taps that almost universality of people's sense of flawedness, of imperfection in a way to kind of respond and manage that?
I think precisely, we go back to what we talked about earlier. What makes this spirituality spread, if you decided you want what we have, and people have seen what members of AA have, and they say, how do you get it? And they say, we live these 12 steps, and they've said, oh, we can live these, you know, just take alcohol out of the first word and alcoholics out of the last word, and, you know,
substitute anything.
And, you know, it works in varying degrees for varying people, but I think this is why, again, goodness attracts. When we see something good, we want to be like that. This again, think of the charismatic figures, and we want to be like that. And we read their biographies, or we go to where they are, and because we want to be like that. Well, the triumph of AA, the triumph of its members, is they have, at least a number of the members have attained that spirituality, that others want to have this, and they look, you know, and they, you know, obviously they see the flaws in that we're all flawed in some way.
Yeah. How do you see the steps kind of interacting with the shame of its members in terms of that kind of balming, almost a kind of a balm or medicating effect that shame that members bring?
I think the 6th and the 7th steps, and then go down to the 10th step. I think 4, 8, and 9 are for guilt, inventory, and amends. 4th step made a search and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. 8th step made a list of all people we had harmed, became willing to make amends to them all. 9th step, I hope I'm getting them right. God knows I've heard them all enough. Made direct amends to such people whenever possible, except when to do so would bring harm to them or others. That accept is important. It's the only step you can have it in. Whereas in the 5th step is actually admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. In other words, it's honesty.
Right.
And then in the 6th and 7th steps, I became entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character, humbly ask Him to remove our shortcomings. People used to write to Bill Wilson and ask him the difference between defects of character and shortcomings, and they all had their theories. They would explain them at 3-4 page length, saying, you know, this is what I say, and the group disagrees with me. Please write and tell the group they're wrong. And Bill would, he'd look and say, you know, he said, the reason I use defects of character and shortcomings, I was trying not to use the same word twice. But if you find more profound meaning than I did, this is a wonderful gift that you have received, and please go. It's like marvelous. Again, this is part of learning to love that man from his letters. But I think these are the steps that address shame. There's what is wrong, these defects of character, these shortcomings, which will always be there. I mean, one becomes willing and one asks, humbly asks. In fact, the original 7th step read, humbly on our knees asked, but they decided that was too religious, so they can't kick that out. But this, I think the 12 steps touch both guilt and shame in those key steps in the middle. I think the other one that's forgotten, though, is the last half of that 10th step. When we were wrong, promptly admitted it. You know, continue to take personal inventory, and when we were wrong, promptly admitted it. I think so many people, and I've heard this at meetings, this, I think, has saved many marriages. You know, rather because the alcoholic recognizes that resentment is the #1 offender, causing more alcoholics to drink again than anything else. I don't know the exact wording, but something to that effect. And you know, the way to overcome resentment is to admit that you're wrong. And rather than mistakes were made, the natural tendency when we make a mistake is to try to justify it in some way, which just digs the mistake deeper. And the part of wisdom is when we are wrong, promptly admit it. And you look back at the ancient wisdom spiritualities and all traditions, they all say the same thing. You know, at the end of the day, you know, if you've made any mistakes, correct them. You know, go and make peace with people who you may have offended. And I've heard people at meetings describe the differences it's meant in their lives. Because if you do it every day, it's so easy. I think there's a phrase we use in the spirituality of imperfection, which Kathy picked up from what was a popular TV show. This character said, you know, if you admit you're wrong every day, then getting into a big wrong is sort of nothing worse than a dry shave. And I tried shaving dry to see what that was like, and now I understand it. This medicine to prevent, I'm trying to think, vaccination, so that shame not disable you, is to every day acknowledge if you are wrong, constantly admit it. And so there are the 12 the 12 steps are ingenious. Not that they were thinking this. Again, the 12 steps capture and make available for the modern world. The postmodern world may be different, but captured, made available for the modern world an ancient spirituality that had largely been lost. And this is the attractiveness of it. The main vehicle of spirituality has almost always been religion within the West. You know, just think for the regions of the book, in the West. But somehow after the Enlightenment, this began to be lost, and by the middle of the 20th century, there wasn't any credibility in the traditional vehicles for lots of people. And sort of he came along and unearthed this and repackaged it in a way that made it acceptable to large numbers, because there's a truth in there that's very attractive. Again, our minds are made for truth. When we see it, our minds gravitate toward it, grab it. Yeah. And the 12 steps made this traditional wisdom available. And this part of this traditional wisdom is precisely, how do you live with the realization there's something wrong with you?
You know, I'm wondering if this acceptance, sort of, if the shame experience is almost universal, and that at its core it's this acceptance of limitation. Is this the common ground between a counselor and a therapist? I mean, a kind of a acceptance of
explain.
limitation between a person seeking recovery and a person offering to assist. Is this sort of I'm thinking of
I think it has to be right. I mean, the idea of a wounded healer, the idea that we are united by our wounds, by what's wrong with us. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Again, not, kind of, some people try to carry this to extremes, and, this does not have to do with the ills treated by physicians and surgeons, let's say. The physical ills need physical, but when you get to this realm of, pardon the expression, the spiritual, this realm that we cannot put clearly in words, this realm that we experience without being able to talk about and describe and demonstrate the way in which we do in the sciences. The link is precisely through woundedness and a realization of shared woundedness. I think it's fascinating. Counselors have told me at times that they don't even have to talk about it at times. A counselor-client relationship can be one where they start intuiting with each other. Yeah. And whether you call it transference or again, don't bother naming it. Experience it and sort of experience the experience. Experience yourself experiencing the experience. It's not to be analyzed.
So in some ways, the counselor who's had some kind of hit bottom experience in their own life is not a defect they bring to their work, but actually an asset that they bring to their work.
I heard recently a counselor who's lost a child suddenly and thought that this was irrelevant to the counseling, and so, took a short leave of absence and took care of burying the child and went back to work. And clients started relating to her differently. She did. In her mind, this had nothing to do. Her experience of sorrow, her experience of grief, she'd all gone through. She'd put herself all back together, I think with the help of another therapist and everything, and now was ready to go back to work as she'd worked before. And did not, and something had changed. Her clients recognized it. I can't explain that, but hearing it doesn't surprise me. Our core humanity cries out to other people's core humanity if we let it. And if someone is in a helping profession, they necessarily are letting it. Do
you think a lot of people are drawn to professional treatment, and I don't mean just addiction treatment here at all, but drawn to treatment behind this condition of shame?
Oh yes, definitely. Yeah. I mean, this is where most of the literature on shame is psychiatric or psychological, and I could rattle off tremendous bibliographies because I'd like to write another book on shame. The one that I wrote back in 1981, I've recently revised and updated. It's freely available online now, so that anybody can get it and read it freely. Because I wanted to get it. I didn't want to have to repeat myself. That stuff was important, but I didn't want to have to say it again in this new book, where I want to go further in what happens to shame in a world without privacy, which is my concern in this, how the world has changed since 1981 and now with shame. But there's a vast literature of therapeutic literature. Helen Block Lewis is the first psychoanalyst who wrote on this, and people still keep referring back to Lind and Pierce and Singer. The one problem is the popularization of shame got out of hand.
That would have been through the 80s,
yeah,
through that period, kind of as a pop cultural.
Yeah, it got picked up, and people found a resonance, but some of the would-be helpers had too great a need to make people feel good instead of living with their feeling bad. That's because these weren't evil people or bad people. It's difficult when you're confronted with someone who feels bad to not want to make them feel good. Well, the best thing you can do to make an alcoholic feel good is offer them a drink. So, that we know enough not to do that. Well, you have to live through the feeling bad. And I think what happened by the mid to late 80s, the feel-good phenomenon came in. And shame got totally distorted back again to being something wrong. You've got to outgrow your shame. You've got to get beyond your shame. Whereas the whole secret is you have to embrace your shame. But this went off on this horrid tangent.
And it sounded like your mouthwash commercial that you referred to earlier. There was a sense in that popularization that people got shamed greater so they would come and buy products.
Yeah, I don't want to accuse those people of that, but I think you're right. Because some of them I at times would appear in workshop settings with them, and they'd be in a different room. And these were not evil people. They really, really wanted to help other people. They genuinely wanted to help. They just didn't know because they never had experienced.
But some of the core concepts related to shame really got lost from sort of the over-popularization of that.
Yeah, that's why I want to write another book, and that's why I put the book that was written on, I revised it, updated it, and made it freely available, because yes, exactly.
Yeah. Ernie, in your book on shame, there's a section where you talk about amends, where you really link that to the importance of forgiveness. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Yes, I'm glad for the opportunity, because I think I missed some. Before I talked about making amends is related to the guilt side more, but it's rich on both sides. I mean, there's an evening of the scale, and therefore all of this balancing back, which is so much a part of guilt and the justice side of this whole thing. But the experience of making amends, and made direct amends to such people whenever possible, except when to do so would cause harm for them or others. It's great hearing the stories of people. They go off to make amends, and they find out that a significant number of people say, "I don't want to talk to you. You screwed up my life. You were a disaster in my life. Go away." And they do, and they go to some other people, and the other people say, "Well, don't." I never thought of it. It never bothered me that much at the time. I'm glad you got your act straight now, but it's very good. Thank you for coming. But there's this little small percentage that says, well, yes, you hurt me. You hurt me like hell, and I get, it still hurts. You're coming and saying you're making amends does not. But I understand what you're trying to do, and okay. I mean, you're asking forgiveness. Okay. As far as I'm concerned, you have my forgiveness. Making amends is an opportunity, an occasion to experience forgiveness. And what I said before, that we cannot forgive unless we have the experience of being forgiven. And the process, the genius, again, of those 12 steps and the wisdom tradition from which they come, in insisting that people make direct amends, set up the possibility, the occasion, the situation in which forgiveness might more readily be experienced. And I think, to convey, this is going to connect then where I could have also said more, when we are wrong, promptly admitting it. Maybe the times we don't promptly admit it, we wait 2 or 3 days before we admit it, or even we promptly admit it. I mean, we need experiences of being forgiven. It goes under honesty too. This letting significant others know us as we are, realizing it's not a case of fearing being found out, but discovering that we can be found. In being accepted, we realize we are forgiven. These are people who know my flaws, and yet they accept me. And so this possibility in so many places, but I think that amends is a good way to get into it if you're going to be exploring this with people, that why have to make amends?
I hadn't thought of it until you were just saying this, but the second half of that 10 steps sort of decreases the time span between an opportunity for forgiveness. It almost makes it immediate.
An experience of forgiveness.
And sort of this lessens the baggage one carries through that process.
Yeah, one always faces, I'm sorry, I want to apologize, I was wrong earlier today. You're damn right you were, go to hell. Okay, that's I did my part, and for your spiritual, you don't say this, but you're thinking for your spiritual benefit, I hope you get over your resentment. But,
and you have no control
I did my part. I did my part.
Right.
See, this, I think, going back, keep coming back to what things for addiction counselors. I do think that the temptation to want to control and be in charge is a great trap for counselors. They're wanting, the ownership, as you expressed it earlier, the wanting to be the one who's in charge, the one who helps this person overcome this. No, you're not. You're the vehicle by which a higher power does that. I mean, I don't care, again, how you metaphor it or what you do with it, but you're not. If you are trying to be in control, you are messing up, baby. And it's not going to work. And this willingness to accept the reality of that. I am a channel. I think in one of the prayers that's suggested in the AA literature, a vehicle. I'm not the message. I'm the messenger. I'm not. And this, I think it's very difficult for counselors, even the best and top-notch counselors, to avoid that trap. I think that's one reason I'm not a counselor and I got into psychology. The little counseling I did as a psychology major, and I was trying to control people. It was very hard to have people come to me in their helplessness. It had nothing to do with addiction or anything, by the way. Just people. In fact, if any, I did a little bit of marriage counseling. Of course, I know how to fix these people, and I don't think I did. It's a good thing I went off to history. But I can really internalize the temptation then, which I'm sure is much more acute for those who are really doing this full-time as a profession, especially dealing with addicts and alcoholics.
Right. You talked about the changing context from the time you wrote the first edition to now. What are some of those new circumstances that make shame a sort of a different kind of issue today than it was?
Well, they're basically the technological changes. As I said, I wrote Not God on a Typewriter. I wrote the Shame and Guilt booklet on my first, half on a typewriter and half on my first K-Pro. Long before the world of DOS even. I'm one of those rare people who's at home on the command line. And that, and then the technology of webcam and publicity, this, supposedly in England now there's one camera for every 4 citizens, and they're posted in public places, and they're monitoring people, and even at times they're using children's voices they catch someone on one of these mounted cameras tossing a cigarette butt in the street, and a voice of a child comes on saying, "You shouldn't do that, you're littering, now you pick the..." And there's public shaming going. This is worse than being in the stocks or having a scarlet letter on your front, for God's sake. Everybody, and then online, everybody knows everything about you. Not really, but they know. So it's a totally different world in the things, the context in which we feel good and bad. In a way, this insulates from trying to please everybody else because it's so obvious you can't. When you've got all these people who get online. And on the other hand, I think this leads people to hide more because they're afraid that if they expose anything, they'll expose everything.
If we think about that in the context of addiction counseling today, do you have some thoughts about what addiction counselors need to understand about shame and guilt, or what responses they might offer as they encounter that in our work?
I think addiction has a lot to do with shame, and addiction is the result of shame. When we speak, this image of, I don't especially like this theologizing of it, but people say we are made with a God-shaped hole in the middle of our being, and we are not at rest until somehow that hole is filled. And we try to fill it with booze, we try to fill it with pot, we try to fill it with injecting drugs, we try to fill it with sniffing, we try to fill it with sex, we try to fill it with gambling, we try to fill it with big cars, we try to fill it with investment portfolios. We try to fill it by publicity. The hole is always there. This, I think, is why successful people so often, not so often, but when they commit suicide, everybody wonders why they had everything. No, they didn't. They had all those things and the hole was still there. And to some answer, so addiction is, the attempt to fill this hole, whether it's God-shaped or not, there's a hole there. And for counselors to realize that this is what's going on. There are no pat answers. There are no easy answers to be part of this struggle. This is where, again, you don't have to be an alcoholic to help with another alcoholic or addict or anything else, but you have to have experienced this hole in the middle of your being, and have learned how to live with it with a degree of serenity, and to help others do this. And you can't do it by telling them.
We're in an unusual position in the addictions field right now. We're in a position of aging, of leadership that's long tenured. In the next 5 to 7 years, we're going to have rapid turnover of really some of the major pioneers in modern addiction treatment. We're very concerned about leadership development and leadership succession planning and mentoring a new generation of workers. I don't know anybody that's probably done more mentoring than you have over the course of my professional career. And of course, I've been very blessed by that mentoring that you've offered me. I was wondering, with all of the people that have come to you for different kinds of assistance, what are some of your thoughts about mentorship and what mentors can offer, and what sort of this aging generation can offer sort of a new generation coming behind them?
Well, I think in the first place, this very thing that we're doing